came up with some recommendations worked.
Okay, a couple of quick questions on robo-lending and robo-advice. I'm
Yep.
not sure who the right person to ask that question is to. You recently took action against Westpac for not following responsible lending rules when they used automated processes to assess customer applications for credit card increases. Can you please explain what you believe Westpac were doing when they failed to properly assess applications for credit cards?
Michael Sadat, Senior Executive Leader at ASIC. In that particular matter, our concern was that Westpac wasn't obtaining information from the consumer about their financial situation. What they were doing instead was looking at the spending patterns and repayment patterns of the consumer and using various systems to determine whether the consumer was in a position to afford more credit. And although those systems can help with determining whether somebody can afford more credit, our view was that the responsible lending obligations required more than just that, and that they required some inquiry of the customer about their income and employment status.
And what action did you take following your inquiry?
So as a result of identifying those concerns, we engaged with Westpac, and Westpac agreed to make changes to their processes, and they've now they suspended the sending of limit increase invitations for some period. They've now agreed to make changes to that process so that they are making inquiries about income and employment status. They're also committed to undertaking a remediation program which will look at consumers who potentially were provided with extra credit that they couldn't afford, and depending on the individual circumstances of those consumers, refunds will be applied to those customer accounts.
Okay. Do you think from your experience that this is limited to Westpac? Have you done a broader evaluation, or do you think this kind of thing can happen or will increase more in the future under automated processes?
So this particular matter was identified when we did a review of the industry. We looked at the processes of all the major credit card issuers and to make sure that all of them were making sufficient inquiries. And so we don't think this is a widespread issue, but we continue to look at this. Although we were concerned with Westpac's automated processes in this particular case, I don't think we would say that automated processes in general are problematic. It's really how they're used and the reliability of those processes.
So on that base, on that, following on that, you've established a robo-advice task force, which is investigating the use of computer algorithms to match investors with suitable assets, obviously presumably at lower cost than human advisors. Can you provide an update on the status of the robo-advice task force and what are your findings so far?
So, Senator, the ASIC's robo-advice task force is part of its broader work in setting up an innovation hub within ASIC. So that is a area that has a number of staff that are particularly focused on new business models as a result of digital disruption that we're seeing in our economy. Having regard to the areas of interest from that innovation hub, one of the areas, very strong areas of interest is around so-called robo-advice, or the provision of financial advice by digital means. And really there are a number of different business models that are relevant to this provision of digital advice. Some advice is merely around sort of asset allocation and what appropriate holdings in, for example, diversified funds like ETFs might be, given a particular customer's risk profile. And some of them are more sophisticated, with an end goal, for example, of providing quite holistic and sophisticated financial advice.
Sorry to stop you. Could you just give the committee an idea? What are we talking about here? We're talking about automated people phoning up and having an automated response on the other side of the phone. Is it literally a robot?
Yeah, typically the business models vary depending on what the particular aims are, but typically they involve the entry of information through a website and then making of various statements of opinion or recommendations or advice as a result of that information. And that may be advice that's general in nature, so it doesn't take into account the particular client's own personal circumstances, or it may be very tailored to the information that's been entered into the website. And I suppose the real issue And the law as drafted as at the moment is reasonably flexible in terms of recognising these sorts of business models. But there is some uncertainty in the market about how very important legal obligations might apply. So, for example, the Future of Financial Advice reforms introduced an obligation for personal advice to make sure that the advice was in the best interests of the client.
Yeah.
So how does that translate into a digital environment? And these are some of the issues
It's like
that
press this button if you own this much assets, or press this button if you want high growth stocks, or press this button if you want.
And so the robo-advice task force is really around looking at where some of those areas of uncertainty or where there might be further need for guidance. And we are proposing to release a consultation document with draft guidance to the market in the not too distant future, Senator, to try and deal with some of these issues.
The key point that Mr. Price has made is, robo or not, it still has to be in the best interests of the client.
Yeah, that's right.
It still has to be appropriate. And we want to make sure that some of the potential new entrants understand that.
That's right.
It's not suddenly the case that new rules apply because you happen to be robo. On the other hand, there seem to be some very good opportunities for some existing players to incorporate robo-advice into their models and potentially reach a wider audience with a better priced product around advice as well.
And I think that's an excellent point that the Deputy Chair has made. I mean, ASIC welcomes these sorts of developments where they comply with the law. At the moment, there was a study that ASIC did several years ago. It showed that only 1 in 5 people get financial advice. Part of that may relate to cost and accessibility, and so there is an opportunity for these types of tools to provide financial advice, be it tailored or general advice or broader, to a larger range of people, hopefully for the benefit of all.
And presumably the financial services companies that are offering robo-advice don't have to pay commissions to robots.
One would think so.
Right.